Silent Interlude. 2 years after Naomi's departure, Julian's apartment looked different. Gone were the botanical prints and watercolors that once decorated every wall. In their place hung framed concert programs and minimalist art that demanded little emotional investment. The only reminder of Naomi was the single sketchbook he kept in his bedside drawer, untouched for months now. Julian adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, preparing for tonight's fundraising event for the Boston Chamber Orchestra. At 32, he had regained his position as principal cellist, his focus on music sharper than ever before. The emptiness Naomi left had gradually filled with compositions, performances, and students who looked at him with admiring eyes. "You've come back to yourself," Maestro Delaney had commented during their last rehearsal. "There's something different in your playing now, something deeper." Julian hadn't told her that the depth came from a hollow place, a space carved by unanswered questions that he'd learned to transform into music. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Car's outside. Don't keep the donors waiting, Maestro." The fundraiser was held in the conservatory of the same botanical garden where he'd first met Naomi. Julian found himself scanning the crowd as he entered, a habit he couldn't break despite knowing she wouldn't be there. Thomas noticed and squeezed his shoulder. "Still?" he asked quietly. Julian shook his head. "Just ghosts," he replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The evening proceeded predictably. Wealthy patrons making small talk, musicians performing brief selections, Maestro Delaney announcing their upcoming season featuring Julian as soloist for Elgar's cello concerto. It was everything he'd worked toward. Yet as applause filled the room, Julian felt strangely detached. Later that night, walking home through the spring air, Julian found himself taking a detour past the small gallery where Naomi had once exhibited her botanical illustrations. It had changed hands several times since then, currently showcasing abstract sculptures. He paused at the window, remembering the opening night when Naomi had nervously clutched his hand as people admired her detailed renderings of rare plants. "Julian?" He turned to find Elena Rivera, one of Naomi's former friends, standing behind him. They had met occasionally at gatherings before Naomi left, but never stayed in touch after. "I thought that was you," she said, her expression cautious. "How have you been?" "Good," he answered automatically. "Working a lot. You?" "Fine." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just in town for a conference. I live in San Francisco now." An awkward silence stretched between them before Julian asked the question he couldn't help but voice. "Have you heard from her?" Elena's hesitation told him everything before she spoke. "I have," she admitted. "Not often, but occasionally." Julian felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "Is she okay?" "She's..." Elena seemed to choose her words carefully. "She's dealing with some things, but yes, I think she's okay now." "Now," Julian repeated. "So she wasn't before?" Elena looked away. "I should go. My hotel's just down the block." "Elena, please," Julian said, his composer's disciplined control slipping. "I've respected her wish for no contact. I haven't tried to find her in over a year. I just need to know why." "It wasn't my secret to tell then, and it still isn't," Elena replied gently. "But Julian, she never stopped." She caught herself. "I'm sorry. I really should go." Julian watched her walk away, his mind racing with the unfinished sentence. She never stopped what? Thinking of him? Loving him? It was the first crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded Naomi's disappearance. That night, he pulled out her sketchbook for the first time in months, fingers tracing the lines of drawings that captured plants with scientific precision, yet somehow made them look alive, almost breathing on the page. He remembered how she could identify any flower, any tree, explaining their life cycles with quiet passion. When his phone rang at midnight, He answered without checking the caller. Julian? It's Thomas. Remember that composer from the Chicago Symphony I told you about? He just called. Their principal cellist broke his wrist, and they need someone for their recording session next week. I recommended you. Chicago? Julian repeated, staring at Naomi's drawing. It's just for 4 days, Thomas continued, but it's Yoshida's new concerto. This could be huge for you. Julian thought about his upcoming Elgar performance, his students, the carefully reconstructed life he'd built in Boston. Then he thought about Elena's words and the unfinished sentence that suggested there was more to Naomi's story than he knew. I'll do it, he said, making a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. Email me the details. After hanging up, Julian placed the sketchbook back in the drawer. Perhaps Chicago would simply be a professional opportunity. Or perhaps, as Elena's words suggested, there were truths he still didn't know, truths that might be waiting in a city he'd never visited, where Naomi's ghost wouldn't be lurking around every familiar corner. Whispers of departure. The first time Julian Mercer saw Naomi Winters, she was sketching a rare orchid in the Botanical Gardens greenhouse. Her concentration was absolute, hands moving with delicate precision across the page. Julian, there to practice his cello in the garden's acoustically perfect domed room, found himself drawn to her stillness among the lush foliage. "Do you always stare at strangers?" she asked without looking up, her pencil never pausing. Julian smiled, adjusting, his cello case on his shoulder. "Only when they're in my favorite spot. That was 3 years ago." 3 years of morning coffee with cinnamon, of Naomi's botanical illustrations covering the walls of their apartment, of Julian practicing cello while she sketched beside him. 3 years of building a life that felt as natural as breathing. Until the morning Julian woke to find half the closet empty and a note on the kitchen counter that simply read, "I'm sorry. Please don't look for me." No explanation, no warning, just emptiness where Naomi had been. "She must have given you some indication," his friend Thomas insisted over drinks a week later. "People don't just disappear," but she had. Completely. Her phone disconnected, social media accounts deleted, mutual friends claiming ignorance. Julian called her parents in Arizona, only to be told coldly that Naomi had asked them not to share any information. "She needs space," her mother said, sympathy in her voice despite her firm words. Sometimes that's all we can give someone we love. But space felt like abandonment to Julian. The apartment echoed with her absence. Each morning he reached across the bed only to find cold sheets. He'd walk past art supply stores and spot materials she would have loved. For months, he couldn't play his cello without remembering how she'd close her eyes when he practiced, her hand still moving across her sketchbook as if his music guided her pencil. He left messages everywhere, emails to accounts she no longer checked, letters to addresses where she no longer lived. He composed pieces for her, recordings sent into the void. Nothing came back. "You need to accept she's gone," his sister Valerie told him 6 months later, helping him pack away Naomi's remaining art supplies. "Some questions don't get answers." Julian nodded, but couldn't bring himself to discard anything. Instead, he boxed everything carefully. Her specialty paper, her watercolors, the dried flowers she kept for reference, and stored them in the spare room closet, just in case. For the first year, he lived in suspended animation. His playing suffered. The Boston Chamber Orchestra, where he had been gaining recognition, placed him in the back row. His conductor, Maestro Delaney, pulled him aside after a particularly distracted rehearsal. "Whatever is haunting you, Mercer, you need to either exorcise it or invite it in," she said. "But this halfway existence is killing your music." That night, Julian stood in the spare room surrounded by Naomi's boxed possessions. He picked up one of her sketchbooks, the only one she'd left behind, and opened to a drawing of himself playing cello, his eyes closed in concentration. Below it, her handwriting. The sounds between notes are where the truth lives. He closed the book and made a decision. The next morning, he delivered all the boxes to a storage facility, kept only the sketchbook, and called the orchestra's concertmaster to request additional rehearsal time. If Naomi could leave without explanation, he could learn to live without answers. The empty spaces would simply be the rests in his composition, necessary, meaningful, in their own way. What Julian couldn't know was that across the country, Naomi was filling notebooks with words she couldn't bring herself to send. Her hands, already beginning to betray her with the first tremors of what was to come. Unexpected resonance. Chicago in autumn was colder than Julian expected, the wind whipping off Lake Michigan with surprising force as he exited the cab outside the Symphony Center. The recording session had gone exceptionally well. Yoshida himself had complimented Julian's interpretation of the difficult solo passages. But Julian found his mind wandering during breaks, wondering if Naomi had ever walked these streets. On his third day in the city during lunch break, he wandered into the Chicago Botanic Garden, drawn by old habits and memories. He wasn't prepared to see her. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks. The woman sat on a bench near the Japanese garden, her copper hair shorter than he remembered, her face thinner. But when she turned slightly to adjust her position, Julian knew with absolute certainty it was Naomi. She wasn't sketching. Instead, her hands rested in her lap, partially covered by fingerless gloves despite the moderate temperature. She was simply watching the koi fish swim in lazy circles. Julian stood frozen, his heart hammering. 3 years of questions, anger, confusion, and longing crystallized into a moment of paralysis. Should he approach? Walk away? His decision was made for him when Naomi looked up and saw him. Her face paled, eyes widening in shock. Neither moved for several seconds. Then, surprisingly, a small smile touched her lips. Not happiness exactly. Something more complex. But not the horror or rejection he had feared. She nodded once, as if confirming something to herself, and gestured to the empty space beside her. Julian approached slowly, afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. When he sat down, the bench felt solid beneath him, but everything else seemed dreamlike. "I heard you were recording with the Chicago Symphony," Naomi said quietly, her voice achingly familiar. "Elena mentioned it when she called after seeing you in Boston." "You knew I was here," Julian realized. "Did you want me to find you?" Naomi looked down at her gloved hands. "I've been debating that question for 3 days. She took a deep breath. "How are you, Julian?" The normalcy of the question after years of silence was almost absurd. Julian gave a short, incredulous laugh. "How am I? I don't even know how to answer that." "That's fair," she conceded. "I wouldn't know how to answer it either." They sat in silence, watching the fish. Julian noticed how she occasionally flexed her fingers, a subtle movement that seemed unconscious. "Why did you come to Chicago?" he finally asked. "Northwestern Memorial has one of the best neurology departments in the country," she answered, her voice matter-of-fact. "I've been part of a treatment program here for the past 2 years." Julian felt the ground shift beneath him. "Neurology?" Naomi turned to face him fully. "I have something for you, if you want it. Not here, though." "Where?" "My apartment is a few blocks away." She hesitated. "I understand if you don't want to come. If you'd rather just leave things as they are." Julian studied her face. Thinner, yes, but with the same clear gray eyes that had once looked at him with love. "I've spent 3 years with things as they are," he said. "I need to know what they could have been." Naomi's apartment was small but filled with light, its walls covered, with photographs of plants rather than drawings. On a desk near the window sat a computer with a specialized keyboard and stylus. What was notably absent were any art supplies. No easels, no paints, no pencils. "Tea?" she offered, moving to the kitchen with a slight stiffness Julian hadn't. noticed before, Naomi, he said, unable to maintain small talk. Please, just tell me. She nodded, abandoning the tea preparation. From a bookshelf, she removed a stack of leather-bound journals, at least a dozen, and placed them on the coffee table. These are for you, she said. I wrote to you, almost every day for the first year, then weekly after that. Things I couldn't say but needed to tell you. Julian stared at the journals. Why couldn't you say them? Why did you just disappear? Naomi slowly removed her gloves. Her hands, once steady and precise enough to capture the most delicate botanical details, now trembled visibly. She held them out. Focal dystonia with early-onset Parkinson's, she said softly. Diagnosed 3 weeks before I left. Progressive and degenerative, primarily affecting fine motor control. She attempted to steady her right hand with her left, but both shook. My doctors initially gave me very little hope of continuing as an illustrator, any kind of illustrator. Julian felt the room tilt. And you didn't tell me because... Because you would have stayed, she answered simply. You would have put your life on hold to take care of me. I watched my father do that for my mother until her MS took everything from both of them. I couldn't do that to you. Not when your career was just taking off. She gestured to the journals. Everything is in there. Every treatment, every setback, every moment I almost came back to you. Every reason I didn't. Julian reached for the top journal, his fingers brushing its worn cover. And now? Why show me now? Because I'm stable, she said. The treatment program is working better than expected. I found new ways to create. Digital illustration with adaptive technology. She nodded toward the computer. And because Elena said you looked at peace, finally. I thought maybe now the truth wouldn't derail your life the way it would have then. Julian opened the journal to the first entry, dated 3 days after she left. The handwriting was Naomi's, but shakier than, he remembered. The first line read, Julian, today I watched our apartment building from across the street for an hour, fighting the urge to come home. He closed the book, overwhelmed. I need time with these, he said quietly. Naomi nodded. Take them. Take. As long as you need. She hesitated. I'm not asking for anything, Julian. I just thought you deserved to know it wasn't because I stopped loving you. As Julian gathered the journals, a question formed that he wasn't sure he wanted answered. But he had lived too long without answers to leave this one unasked. If the treatment hadn't worked, he said carefully, would I ever have known? Naomi's silence was answer enough. Dissonant. Truth's Julian's hotel room became a fortress of revelation as he immersed himself in Naomi's journals. He canceled his return flight to Boston, called his students to reschedule lessons, and read through 3 years of Naomi's life without him, a parallel timeline to the one he had lived. The early entries were chaotic, filled with fear and self-loathing. The neurologist asked if I had support at home, she had written. I said no, because saying yes would mean watching you sacrifice everything. I'd rather hurt you once than destroy you slowly. Julian read about her first months alone in Phoenix, with her parents, the progressive worsening of her tremors, the experimental medications that left her nauseated and exhausted. She described in painful detail how she had tried to draw her lifeline, only to find her hands betraying her. Tried sketching a simple daisy today, one entry read. It looked like it was drawn during an earthquake, broke down for hours afterward. Keep thinking about how you would have held me, told me it would be okay. But it's not okay, and that's why I can't let you see me like this. As Julian progressed through the journals, he found references to therapy sessions where Naomi's psychologist challenged her decision to leave. Dr. Reynolds asked today if I had the right to make that choice for you without your input, she wrote. I couldn't answer. The thought of you witnessing my decline terrifies me. But the thought that I underestimated your strength haunts me, equally. The turning point came about 18 months after her diagnosis. Naomi had begun working with a neurologist at Northwestern who specialized in musicians with movement disorders. Though not an artist herself, Naomi qualified for an experimental treatment program designed for those with fine motor control issues. First day with the adaptive stylus, she wrote. It's frustrating and nothing like holding a real pencil, but I created something recognizable. Dr. Patel says neuroplasticity is on my side. My brain can learn new pathways. For the first time since diagnosis, I feel a glimmer of possibility. Julian read about her slow progress with digital illustration, the specialized software that could smooth tremors, the support group where she met others with similar conditions. She had built a new life, different from the one they had shared, but not without purpose. The most recent entries revealed her growing doubt about staying away. Saw an article about Julian's promotion to principal cellist, she had written 6 months earlier. Pride and regret all mixed together. He's thriving without me, which was the whole point, wasn't it? So why does it hurt this much? Julian read until dawn, absorbing every word, every emotion. When he finally closed the last journal, sunlight was streaming through the hotel windows. He sat motionless, processing the fullness of what Naomi had endured alone. His phone rang, Thomas, wondering about his return. I need another week, Julian told him. Maybe more. It's complicated. It's her, isn't it? Thomas asked. You found her. She found me, Julian corrected. Or maybe we found each other. I don't know yet. After showering, Julian went to the Symphony Center for his final recording session. He played with an intensity that surprised even him, channeling the emotional tumult of Naomi's journals into Yoshida's complex composition. The composer approached him afterward. There was something different today, Yoshida said. Something raw, authentic. Just connecting with the music differently, Julian replied. That evening, he called Naomi. Can we meet? They chose neutral territory, a small cafe near the lake. Julian arrived first, ordered coffee, and tried to organize his thoughts. When Naomi entered, he noticed things he'd missed in the shock of their first encounter, the slight stiffness in her gait, the careful way she handled her bag. Did you read them? She asked after sitting down. All of them, he confirmed. I have questions. Of course you do. Not about why you left, Julian clarified. I understand that now, even if I don't agree with it. My questions are about now, about what happens next. Naomi looked surprised. I didn't think you'd want there to be a next, she said quietly, after what I did. 3 years ago, you made a choice based on fear and love, Julian said. You wanted to protect me. I get that. But you also took away my agency, my right to choose whether to stay or go. Naomi nodded, accepting the truth of his words. I did, and I've questioned that decision every day since. Your latest journals suggest your condition has stabilized, Julian said. What does that mean exactly? It means good days and bad days, she explained. The tremors are managed with medication and therapy. I've adapted my work to accommodate my limitations. I create botanical illustrations digitally now for scientific journals and educational materials. She hesitated. It's not the same as traditional drawing, but I've found my way back to creating. And the prognosis? Uncertain, she admitted. The progression has slowed significantly with treatment. I may maintain this level of function for years, or things could change. That's the reality. Julian took a deep breath. I have one more. Question, Naomi. The most important one. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hands. If I wanted to be part of your life again, whatever that might look like, would you let me choose that for myself, this time? Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Are you saying you would want that? After everything? I'm saying I want the right to decide, Julian answered. 3 years ago, you made a choice to leave because you loved me. Now I'm asking for the chance to make my own choice. And if things get worse? She asked, her voice barely audible. If I become a burden? Then, we face it together, Julian said simply. That's what partnership means. Naomi looked down at her trembling hands. I need time to think about this. It's not just about what I want anymore. Julian nodded. I understand. I have one more day of recording. Then I need to return to Boston to fulfill some commitments. He paused. But Naomi? This time, don't disappear. Whatever you decide, tell me face to face. As they parted outside the cafe, Julian resisted the urge to embrace her. Some distances couldn't be crossed in a single conversation, no matter how honest. But for the first time in 3 years, the silence between them held possibility rather than emptiness. Harmonious resolution. The Boston Symphony Hall hummed with anticipation. Tonight's performance was sold out, partly due to Yoshida's new composition making its East Coast premiere, but equally because of the unexpected buzz around Julian Mercer. In the 6 weeks since his return from Chicago, rumors had circulated about a mysterious piece he would debut as an encore, an original composition, his first. Backstage, Julian adjusted his cufflinks, a gift from Maestro Delaney to celebrate his 30th birthday 2 years earlier. His cello waited in its stand, the instrument that had been his voice when words failed him. Nervous? Thomas asked, straightening his own bow tie in the mirror beside Julian. Oddly, no, Julian replied. He felt centered in a way he hadn't in years, regardless of what might happen after the performance. The past 6 weeks had been transformative. Upon returning to Boston, Julian had immersed himself in preparing for tonight while maintaining daily communication with Naomi, phone calls, texts, even old-fashioned letters. They spoke honestly about fears and hopes, rebuilding trust slowly. 2 weeks ago, Naomi had called with news. She'd been offered a position creating digital botanical illustrations for a research project at Harvard's Arnold Arboretum. It's a 1-year contract, she'd explained. No pressure or expectations, but it would mean moving to Boston. When would you start? Julian had asked, heart racing. After your concert, she'd replied, if that's still something you want. Now, as Julian peeked through the curtain at the filling auditorium, he spotted her in the 3rd row, her copper hair unmistakable. She had arrived yesterday, staying in a hotel despite his offer to let her use his guest room. One step at a time, she'd said. The orchestra took their places to applause. Julian emerged last, acknowledged the audience with a nod, and settled into his chair. As principal cellist, he would lead the string section through Yoshida's complex composition before performing his solo encore. The music began. Yoshida's piece was challenging, with unexpected time signatures and haunting themes that required complete concentration. Julian lost himself in the performance, his bow dancing across strings with practiced precision. When the final note faded and applause erupted, he felt the pleasant exhaustion that came with giving everything to the music. Maestro. Delaney gestured for Julian to take center stage for his encore. The hall quieted as Julian adjusted his chair and positioned his cello. Tonight's encore is a piece I composed recently, he announced to the audience. It's called Unread Letters, and it tells the story of separation, truth, and finding harmony in unexpected places. His eyes found Naomi's in the audience. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Julian began to play. The composition opened with a solitary, melancholy theme, notes that questioned and searched without finding resolution. Gradually, a second theme emerged, intertwining with the first, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint. The piece built to a moment of discordance, almost painful in its intensity, before resolving into something new, neither the first theme nor the second, but a melody that incorporated elements of both while becoming entirely its own. As Julian played the final notes, he closed his eyes, channeling everything he had learned from Naomi's journals, everything he had felt in their years apart and recent reconnection. When silence fell, it held for several heartbeats before the audience erupted in applause. Julian stood, bowed, and exited the stage. He didn't return for the multiple curtain calls, instead heading directly to his dressing room. There, he carefully placed his cello in its case and changed from his formal attire into the clothes he had prepared, jeans and a sweater for the small gathering Thomas had arranged at a nearby restaurant to celebrate. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Thomas or Maestro Delaney. Instead, Naomi entered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That was—" she began, then shook her head, unable to find words. "You understood it?" Julian asked. "Every note," she confirmed. "It was our story," Julian nodded. "Not the one we planned, but ours nonetheless." Naomi approached slowly, her movements careful but determined. From her bag, she removed a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "I have something for you," she said. "It's not much, considering what you just shared with everyone out there, but—" Julian unwrapped the package to find a digital tablet. When he turned it on, he found a series of botanical illustrations, plants native to Boston, rendered with the precision and artistry that had always characterized Naomi's work, despite being created with different techniques. "For your apartment," she explained. "A new beginning, if you want one." Julian set the tablet down carefully. "I've had 6 weeks to think about what I want," he said. "What about you? Have you decided if you're willing to let me make my own choice this time?" Naomi looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly, but steady enough to create beauty in a new way. "I have," she said quietly. "It terrifies me, but yes. Whatever you choose, I'll accept it." Julian stepped closer. "Then I choose us," he said simply. "Not the past version of us. We can't go back to that. But something new that honors who we've become." "Even knowing there are no guarantees?" Naomi asked. "That my condition could worsen?" "There are never guarantees," Julian replied. "For anyone. But I'd rather face uncertainty together than certainty apart." Naomi nodded, a small smile forming. "The Arnold Arboretum project starts next month," she said. "I'll need to find an apartment." Or, Julian suggested carefully, "you could stay with me. Not necessarily moving in right away, but using the guest room while you look for a place. Or not look. Whatever feels right." Another knock interrupted them. Thomas this time, poking his head in. "Everyone's waiting at the restaurant," he said, then noticed Naomi. His eyes widened in recognition before a smile spread across his face. "Take your time," he added, withdrawing quickly. Julian laughed softly. "That's going to be an interesting dinner." "Should I come?" Naomi asked uncertainly. "Only if you want to," Julian said. "But I'd like you to meet the people who helped me survive when you were gone, and I think they'd like to meet the woman who inspired tonight's music." Naomi took a deep breath, then offered her hand. Julian took it gently, feeling the slight tremor against his palm, not something to fear or fix, just part of who she was now. As they left the dressing room together, Julian thought about the composition he had played tonight. Like the piece itself, their story wasn't finished. It was still developing, finding its way to a resolution neither of them could have anticipated when they first met in that botanical garden years ago. Whatever came next, they would face it, as they had created the music tonight. Not in perfect unison, but in harmony, with all the complexity and beauty that entailed.